Hi, I'm Janet Gross. Welcome to Coping Today, a place where we talk about mental health and well-being. This is something we're probably all familiar with, loneliness. Not being alone, but being lonely. Dr. Roy Salgado, professor of counseling at the University of Holy Cross, joins us, as always, to really define and take a look at this. Some have called it insidious. It hides in plain sight, and a lot of people don't even see it as serious or that it can be dangerous.
Yes, and we as a society have been struggling with loneliness for some time. But it's interesting that recently, in the past couple of weeks, the United States Surgeon General pointed out the degree to which Americans in particular are struggling with loneliness. The Surgeon General has just stated that half of Americans, 1 in 2 Americans, has defined themselves as struggling with loneliness, which is on par with what the United Kingdom has recently found as well. The United Kingdom saw that there was an epidemic within their nation of loneliness, that they've actually established a minister of loneliness in the UK.
What?
So we don't have a minister of loneliness in the United States, but the Surgeon General looked at the data, and in the questionnaires that have been handed out as of recently, since the pandemic, we found that 1 in 2 define themselves as experiencing chronic loneliness.
Wow. And it's not necessarily, you don't have enough friends. You could be lonely with a lot of experience chronic loneliness with you still have friends.
You could be in a room full of people and be lonely. You're not alone, but you could feel lonely. And you could have thousands of friends on social media and feel lonely. And it's an interesting dichotomy of offline activity and online activity that perhaps is coming together to contribute to the sense of loneliness that Americans, British people, perhaps even people from around the world are currently experiencing. In my practice, one of the things that I have seen in terms of loneliness across the entire lifespan, whether it be children, adults, or older adults, with regard to loneliness, is the factors that come to play. So I want to kind of just break it up a little bit in terms of what we're seeing. With older adults, we see a lot of older adults who don't have family members come and visit them as often because their family members are busy primarily with work. Yeah. And so you have people who are retired and who perhaps are not actively engaged, and so they're isolated and they're home alone, and maybe they're widowed and they're lonely, and maybe they're in an assisted living facility. We go to the other end of the lifespan. We have children who have grown up in this digital age and who have grown up with these devices and are socialized online, and they're interacting with others, whether they're on their platforms that they're playing video games, or they're Snapchatting, or doing whatever that they're doing on the social media platforms that they participate in, but they're not engaging online, so they're connecting differently, and perhaps even being disconnected and finding themselves being lonely because there's this fear of missing out. They think that life is more exciting out there and their life is not as exciting, so they feel lonely and disconnected. And then you have the people in the middle. You have adults between 18 and 65 who also feel lonely. Why do they feel lonely? What would be contributing to that? One, well, a lot of people are not getting married anymore. The marriage rates have dropped. People aren't having families at the same rates as before. They're having fewer children. And so we don't have that connectivity of marriage, of family, of growing the next generation like previous generations had. And so there are a lot of lonely people out there. There are studies that are showing that by 2030, you're going to have a significant percentage of the population who is over the age of 30, who has never married and never had children, something not before seen in American history or human history. We're having more full-fledged adults not married and not procreating, contributing to this loneliness.
So what's the impetus? What's the starting factor? Is it because we're online too much, or is it because society has changed? That all that is, just be on your own?
Well, society has changed on so many different levels. We used to be a pre-industrial society. When we were an agrarian society, it required to have many children. Yeah. Agrarian societies needed farmers. We needed to work the land. And then you fast forward through the industrial age and into the information age, and where we are now in this digital information age, it doesn't require the reproduction of all these children. We are isolated in our silos with our devices, and we are conducting our daily activities in isolation. And lo and behold, what does that isolation produce? Loneliness.
Wow. That to me is amazing. And when you said, you're online and you're doing all these things, I immediately thought, I've got tons of not me, because I don't do it, but somebody might say, I've got tons of followers.
Right.
Or I follow these people. You don't even know them.
Exactly. Oh, I have 9,000 followers. Oh, I got 3,000 likes within 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And there's this false sense of connectivity with others, with thousands of others, when there really isn't.
No, there is nothing to that. So I guess, what is the answer to is it, because it can't be just casual contact. It has to be intentional contact, I think, you know, to really satisfy the definition of friend, maybe.
Right. Right. In all of these interactions, be they online or offline, because even the offline interactions today are transactional in nature.
Yeah.
They're not intimate, relational, purposeful, intentional, spiritual in nature. It's transactional. Tit for tat, this for that, and you move forward. And so there's nothing deeper. It's all surface. And so whether it's offline or online, the interactions are surface. It's important to try to connect with other on a deeper level, and then that sense of loneliness will dissipate.
In reading, just doing some research on this, you know, somebody said, you know, so somebody's in a assisted living or a nursing home or something, just, oh, I'm going to go visit somebody. That's good. But if you just go for 15 minutes and leave and don't go back,
Right.
then there's no, it's almost like somebody did, you know, threw a leaflet in my door and said, hey, I'm your friend.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's like you're just going to check their pulse. Okay, they're still alive, and move forward. And that doesn't meet anyone's need. It's just, you know, chopping to check their pulse, seeing if they're alive, and it's very surface oriented. You have to get deeper and connect, truly connect intimately with someone.
Okay. So we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk with somebody more, you know, some other counselor about this, and talk about the causes and the solutions, possibly.
Sounds great.
Okay, great. Well, we'll be back in just a minute. Stay with us.
You're home before sunrise, on top of the house, the kids, and our future. The smell of your cooking is our alarm clock. My Shiro's day is never done. So let's start saving a little more now, so we can feel prepared for retirement. A free 3-minute online chat can give us the personalized tips we need so we can live our lives to the fullest. Visit aceyourretirement.org.
And welcome back. We're talking about loneliness. And joining us now is Charles Ruffino, clinical mental health counselor and University of Holy Cross alum. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
With so many people experiencing or saying they're experiencing loneliness, what do you see as the possible reason behind all this?
A lot of it I have personally seen was, you know, there's the disconnect. Societal factors, not having the resources or going out on their own, try to find certain situations in a productive manner, I guess you could say.
Do they not have the practice? Do they not know how to do it anymore? Or
from what I've seen, since COVID, that everything went remote, that disconnect with personal interactions face to face, and to, you know, everything over a monitor or through a tablet or a phone, it just makes things easier for them to sit back and isolate and not have to worry about the outside societal factors of joining people in conversation, or, you know, getting further along with, I guess, personal interaction with each other.
You know, and right there, what you said kind of reminds me of things that I had seen myself in my work and with other colleagues, that there's been a delay during COVID. There's been 2 to 3 years of a segment of the population not acquiring certain skills. So if you're of a certain age and you didn't acquire certain skills, like a young child, for example, who did not learn how to make eye contact with people other than their family, that could have a stage. An adolescent who missed 3 critical years, if you will, 2 critical years in a dating situation perhaps, and that can set the tone. And then wherever you are in your developmental stage, not acquiring those skills to be able to connect, and then it ripples in the subsequent stages of development.
Definitely. You know, especially with the the parents having to deal with stressful environments, stressful situations for their children, they're not even able to pass down the correct skills to them or to their children because of all of the disconnecting factors of their societal environment,
Yeah, and we've talked about that generational thing in previous episodes, that previous generations, there's a disconnect, one generation is different from the other, but it appears that things are just accelerating in terms of how different things are from year to year and month to month, that they've lost their bearings and they're disconnected and feel even more isolated and lonely than in the past.
Yes, sir.
Is it also because of, during the time when we had to stay home, we had to not have those interactions, we found an alternative that we could just do it remotely. So we didn't have to wear sweatpants, or we could, have friends who are just, casual.
Yeah, I would say so.
Most definitely.
Many things, I think, get in the way of us, so we have to fight through it on our own. We do have some responsibility, I guess.
Yeah, I think we all got complacent during that 2-year period of time where we, felt comfortable in our little silos, and then we had to reintegrate into society, and we didn't know how to do it. Even those of us who acquired the skills, we felt gun shy. Shaking hands, for example. I knew, do I shake somebody's hand? Do I not shake somebody's hand? Do I do the fist bump, the elbow thing? Those normal things that you just kind of knew intuitively, you kind of were awkward in it. And think about new generations who perhaps were even more awkward with it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've seen that people are even scared to, just go out and shake somebody's hand, or it's more, there's so many, I guess, different things that, hold up the process of that, where, people are scared to get sick. People are scared to, offend someone else, being that the way that society looks today. So, yeah.
And to that point, maybe we can talk about that piece of afraid to offend. There's so much going on in our world. People are divided on so many different lines, be they political lines, racial lines, sexual orientation, gender identity, male, female, rich, poor, so much division that people kind of retreated to their little sections of the world and are not wanting to interact with other people, perhaps contributing to further isolation and further loneliness.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yes.
do you think because they're afraid to offend, so they're just going to stay away?
I wonder. I have seen clients too who have expressed that they no longer interact with a member of the family because of a political disagreement, or they're not part of my kind type of thing. I think we're seeing something happening culturally, and I would imagine that as a result, we're anxious, we're fearful, we're depressed, and all of those things contribute to loneliness. Because if you're already isolating 50% of a population for one given issue, then another segment for another issue, then you're left standing alone. You're there, and of course you're going to feel lonely if you're pushing everybody else aside for one reason or another.
Yeah, it's like, people can't even have their own beliefs anymore and still get along. To where, if on a political factor, if you're a Republican or Democrat, their beliefs are obviously different, but being able to be different and also connect together, it's the way the media portrays things nowadays, it's definitely harder to get past that, because they're setting that divide for everybody.
So what role does a counselor play in be able to have people who have differing perspectives and different walks of life come together and join with one another? So what are some of the things that perhaps you would do in your clinical work?
Try to get them to remain open-minded is the biggest thing for me. You can only guide everybody. You can't make them do things. So in my line of practice, I just try to get them to remain open-minded to certain scenarios, to where, if this person's belief is this and yours belief is this, that's still okay. It's not like it has to be, well, that guy believes this guy believes this, and it's a fallout, right? So just trying to get them to intertwine and, I guess integrate back into reality, I guess you would say, to where, you don't have this diverse disconnect to where nobody's getting along. And it puts us further back on the scale.
Yeah, and I think about the notion of conflict. We've talked in previous episodes about conflict and people just not knowing how to resolve that anymore. And to reintroduce into society, into culture, that you're going to come across with different people, diverse people on whatever domain, whatever demographic, and that when we do, that we simply interact, we're respectful, and we can perhaps even learn from one another and enjoy those differences from one another, as opposed to isolating ourselves and then finding ourselves lonely. Because I wonder if this loneliness piece that the Surgeon General came up with is a direct result of everybody retreating to their own little sections of their world and not integrating with people that are different from themselves.
Definitely.
And isn't it easily angered? I mean, if you're easily angered, that, for a lonely person, that could be taken as you're always on the defense. You're always looking for somebody because somebody's going to hurt you, so I better not get close. I think that happens sometimes when you're lonely. You push people away because you're afraid to get hurt.
Yeah. It's like you want to stay back and keep that guard up to where you're not subject to that again, you know. But I mean, there's also a lot of things that also go into play too, you know, finance, just the environments, especially out here, you know, the environments that people live in, where the mentality is, you know, I'm going to get you before you get me. And that is troubling our society out here because, you know, you see the gun violence, you know, you see the murder rate, you see everything going on. And it's disheartening, you know.
So does loneliness exacerbate fear, or is it the opposite? How, you know, how does all that work together? Or is it just a...
I feel like it's pretty much all jumbled together, you know? I mean, like, you know, you have fear of this, but you're also lonely, so you're trying to survive and you don't really know which way to go. People have trouble asking for help. They don't want to seem like they're an outsider, but at the same time, you know, they keep peering back to where they wind up sitting in the corner by themselves and not knowing how to deal with anything because they don't want to ask for help or feel
or find somebody who can help go through the muddle with them?
Pretty much.
You know, and as I hear you say that too, I think of what we were discussing earlier from the macro-systemic perspective to a more micro level. You have an individual, for example, that they got divorced. And it's okay, I'm not going to go through that again. It was hurtful, it was painful, I'm going to retreat. I'm not even thinking about another relationship. So they isolate. Time goes on, and because of the hurt, because of the experience, just on an individual level, they now are lonely.
Right.
And people tend to do that. It's our nature that if we feel hurt in some way or negatively impacted, we retreat. And so whether that's an individual in a divorce situation, or two brothers that are fighting, or two friends that had a falling out, and then you take it to groups in society, we are where we are, and more of us are feeling lonely. 50% of us now are feeling lonely. And I wonder what we can do to just, you know, kind of correct course, if you will, because we can't continue this path of 50% of us feeling lonely.
Right, it's going to be, I mean, almost everybody for themselves, and then, you know, there will be no society anymore, you know.
So how do we fix it? You have 30 seconds. No, I'm kidding.
You're here to solve the world's problems.
But I mean, is there an obvious solution, or is it talking it through with somebody? Is it talking it through with friends, or therapy, or reaching out, even though it might hurt? What is?
I feel like it can all. I mean, I feel like it can all help. You know, I mean, especially the reaching out for help, that trying to bring yourself, you know, back into the bubble rather than, you know, always going to the comfortable coping mechanism of, you know, retreating back to technology. And that's where I think a lot of it goes to, where, you know, people are uncomfortable, you know, they feel dissatisfied, yet in front of something like a tablet or a computer or something, they're able to get that instant gratification, a boost of confidence, but in reality it's not really helping them further their process of being. It's really just putting them further back and further behind.
You know,
I'm sorry. So putting your phone down, do you think that would help? Would that make you lonely enough to go, I got to find somebody to talk to?
Definitely.
You know, and I appreciate you saying reaching out, that if you're someone who feels lonely, to just take that risk, make that effort, put the device down and go and connect with another person, that you have to take that first step to not be lonely. You have to connect with another person, so you have to make that effort.
Definitely. And getting uncomfortable, or getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, you know, is the only way to pursue the growth that you need.
My guess is it's probably a step at a time, too. You might be a little uncomfortable, and then you can step another step, you know, till it becomes easier.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Thank you so much, Mark Ruffino, for talking with us. And we're going to continue our conversation on loneliness in just a moment. We'll be back.
Is it okay to call you Mom?
Of course you can.
And we're back talking loneliness, the power it can have to drag us down or the power we might have to overcome it. So, you know, is there self-help here? I guess we've been talking about maybe you could reach out, but.
You know, and it's interesting as you say that, it just popped into my head. Is there self-help? It almost seems counterintuitive when you talk about loneliness.
To do it all yourself.
To do it all yourself.
That's true, I like that.
And so I would say, even if there is a way to do self-help, maybe the initial first step of the self-help would be to take the risk and join with somebody in some capacity. I would say that that's the first step. But I would say that it is counterintuitive to do self-help, because if you're going to combat loneliness, the whole purpose is to not be lonely.
Yeah.
Which is different, again, as we said it from the top, from being alone. You know, to be alone.
Love some alone time.
I love being alone as well. I love some alone time because I'm always around people. I cherish the times that I am blessed to be alone. I feel fortunate that I don't feel lonely.
Yeah.
So for those that do feel lonely, I would say that the self-help piece, that first step, is identifying that you perhaps are lonely, and then making efforts, concerted efforts, to go and reach out, to join with someone else in some capacity.
Because that can really turn your life around. I mean, it can make your outlook better.
It really does, you know, and we are created to be connected, you know, and I'm going to go spiritual here. We're created to be connected with God, for example. So even if you're alone, you know, people who lead a monastic life, a contemplative life, are cloistered and alone in a cell and are not lonely, perhaps, because they have a connection with God. So they're not lonely. They're alone, but they're not lonely. And then you could have people that are in a house full of people, and they're lonely because everyone's in their own room doing their own thing, and they're on their own devices, and no one's interacting and paying attention and connected in any kind of meaningful way. And so how do you combat loneliness? Start to create meaningful relationships. And that's something that as a society we're no longer doing. Parents are not connecting with their children in meaningful ways. Adults are not connecting with significant others to develop romantic relationships in significant ways. And then people later in life are not being visited and interacting with their children and grandchildren in meaningful ways. And so we're all experiencing, or 50% of us are experiencing, some degree of loneliness.
And, you know, you mentioned your connection with God. I mean, I never feel alone, you know, but I do, like on my alone time, even certainly with God. But also, you know, I've prayed for friends, for myself before, and for others, for other people to come into their life.
Yes.
You know, or for them to come into somebody else's life to help them. So I think there's, you know, the fear of rejection that we were talking about may come into play with, you know, making that first step, but somebody else might be feeling the same thing on the other way, you know.
Right.
You know, we were talking, you know, during the breaks about sometimes lonely people present as being gruff or standoffish. They don't want you. Or they, I don't know, they're anxious about everything and they're fearful. Those are all signs, could be signs of loneliness.
Yeah, you know, as we were talking about that during the break, it prompted me to think about what could be contributing to that external expression of anger, kind of gruff and, you know, standoffish. And it makes sense that it would be that classic fight or flight response. That if you're lonely and alone and you don't have the social graces fine-tuned to interact with others, then interactions with others could potentially be anxiety producing and potentially threatening. And so the threatening response is fight or flight. And so you're either anxious and you try to get rid of the situation and leave quickly, or you put on this tough external, angry, gruff expression wall to protect yourself. So it's a defensive mechanism. So I would dare say that, to your hypothesis, that perhaps these people are lonely, that this could be an expression of loneliness. And how do you diffuse that? Perhaps if you come across someone who presents that way, to kill them with kindness, to have like a kind posture and respond in kindness to that individual, so that they put their guard down and they're open and they're like, okay, this is not a threatening person. This is not a threatening situation. Let me engage differently. Let me soften my approach.
And even that small amount of practice could help somebody. That's really interesting. Okay, any final tips?
Yes. Well, if you find that you are noticing that someone is lonely, please reach out to those who may be lonely. Again, 50% of the American population reports to be experiencing some degree of loneliness. So that means that you are likely going to come in contact with someone that you can identify easily as being lonely. So reach out to them, have a cup of coffee with them, take them out for a snowball, just engage with them, commune with them, and we can combat this epidemic that the Surgeon General has stated is happening in our country with regard to loneliness.
And if you're lonely, maybe you'd like to talk to somebody, the University of Holy Cross and Mary Knights of...
Absolutely, and that's a great segue into that if you are lonely, that we do have this available to the residents of Louisiana. So if you identify yourself as being lonely, please reach out to us at the University of Holy Cross, and the assistant will go ahead and triage your call to the clinical director, who will then assign to you a counselor in training and perhaps can offer you the skill sets available and to help you combat loneliness and find people to enter into your life that can bring meaning.
Yeah. And also, we should find the number to the Minister of Loneliness in England, and we'll just call him too.
Yes, I think they're a wealth of information.
Maybe. That's interesting. I'm gonna look that one up. See what they do. Like, what do they do all day?
Yeah.
Okay.
They can't be lonely. They got to be busy.
I think they got to
like.
be busy. I don't know. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Roy Salgado, for talking things through. And of course, we want to thank our guest Charles Ruffino and all of your colleagues at the University of Holy Cross for helping us. And thank you for watching and being a part of Coping Today.